Welcome back to the Growing Money with Sean Chase podcast. I am back with Professor Heath, the one and only for Money School, and we are re-recording our episode because last week we had some audio problems, and as I was trying to work my magic, I couldn't work my magic. So we're back. Professor Heath, how you doing today, man?
I'm good. I just got back from Vegas, and I was saying, I'm tired, but yeah, I'm good. I'm definitely good.
Awesome, man.
How are you?
I'm all right. We had a bit of a conversation before we got started here, and I'm tired, man. I am trying to juggle some different things, and actually this week I've been trying to figure out some stuff financially because as I'm growing my business and trying to level up, I was looking at some expenditures, like things that were coming up. I hired a new worker, but one of the bottlenecks I had was I needed a computer for her so she could be doing editing. And so I was looking online and I saw, it was crazy. Like they had Mac Mini M2s, which is from 2013, or 2023. Sorry, not 2030. That's an old computer. Yeah. Oh, sorry. It's like whirring and buzzing. No, 2023 computer, and it was marked off like 50% because they're like, well, we've got the new M4s, and everyone's like, I don't want to get the M2 anymore. It's old. And I was just like, 50% off. That's great. But I started looking at, my budget and seeing, well, where am I at? Because, 50% off is great, but if you don't have that money or you can't
50% off is zero is it's impossible
right?
to do that number, right?
Right. Well, and see, that was what I was looking at. But, eventually, I crunched the numbers and I was able to figure out how to move stuff around to make it work because it was important enough but I was like, well, 50% off. Should I get two? And that was what went through my head right there. And I was just like, and I had to sit there and slow down and go, no, Sean, you shouldn't get two. You can get one because it's needed. But, it's just like, well, it's a good thing. But, that is kind of my scarcity mindset. And it was my scarcity mindset. I was like, literally, I was thinking, well, maybe there won't be a deal like that again, And so there's a lot of this mindset that comes in, but, we are talking about budgeting this week, which is why I brought it up. Talk to me, brother, about budgeting, this evil word that people love to hate.
The first time that we recorded this podcast, I told a story about how I convinced one of my best friends to lock his girlfriend, actually his future wife, in the trunk of a car so we can continue.
I would love that story to be told again, because when I was editing the video and I was sitting there going, all right, what are we going to lose? And I was just like, and I got to that part, I was like, oh, we can't lose that story. So ladies and gentlemen, get out the popcorn. This story is golden, and please take it away.
Dude, so I was like, well, I can't tell that story again because you've already heard it. So I was like, I didn't sleep at all last night. I'm like, what am I gonna fucking do instead of that story? But I guess we're telling the story. And what I tried to do last week was come to this with like, why is budgeting important? Let's try to sexy up budgeting. And so I thought about an instance. So I was living in LA, and a friend of mine started dating a girl. I was living in Manhattan Beach, and a friend of mine started dating a girl that lived in Venice. And so he came down to LA to visit her, and the three of us went into Hollywood to go see a band that I absolutely love. Like, this guy's name is Dick Dale. He unfortunately has passed away, but he's like a famous surf guitar player. Like, he played the theme song to Pulp Fiction. He's amazing, and he's amazing live. So the three of us go down into Hollywood, and we're at one of those famous bars on the Sunset Strip. I think it was like the Rainbow or the Roxy, and it was just like, a Friday night and I hadn't seen my friend in a while and he's like dating this new girl. It's just like, it was just the vibe was amazing. So we just start drinking, having fun. And his girlfriend, the girl that he came up or came down to see, just gets obliterated, right? So me and my buddy were like heavy drinkers at the time. And she just, at some point just checked out. The show hadn't even started yet. And we had to carry her out of the bar. And she's like, sorry for being graphic, but she's getting sick and like gutter. And my buddy's like, dude, like she ain't gonna make it. We gotta go home. And again, like we're like probably an hour away from in traffic from where I live. And I was like, dude, we can't leave. Like if we take her home, we're never gonna get back to the show. Like we will miss the show. And he's like, yeah, dude, but she's like incapable of like she can't even stand. And so I was like, listen, here's what we should do. we should we should walk her back to your car and put her in the car, and then she could just like sleep in the car while we're at the show. And he was like inebriated just enough to where he's like, yeah, that's a good idea. So we literally like carried her back to the car, and my buddy had a hatchback at the time, and I was like, dude, like even better, let's put let's let's put her in the trunk. Let's put her in the trunk. And she's like super comfortable. Dude, so my buddy put his future wife in the trunk of a car so that we can go back and watch the show, Dick Dale. And like this was way before cell phones. So like she had no ability to contact us. And Lord knows, like, I don't even remember really. She wasn't even really that upset. And I don't really remember what the experience must have been like for her, but we literally locked her in the trunk of a car. And how does this relate to budgeting? Right. So like I was saying last week, to me, there's like four characters in this story. The first character is obviously my friend's future wife. Um, Completely oblivious to what's happening, right? Just like
Yeah.
blacked out, not understanding anything. And a lot of us will approach our spending in that same fashion, right? So, like, we literally have no conscious uh, recollection of what we're spending and how we're spending. And it's a lot like being locked up in the trunk of a car, drunk and
Yep.
passed out. Second character of this story was my friend, right? So he had good intentions, right? But he was convinced by somebody who was not thinking in his best interest. Like I was clearly giving him advice that benefited me and not him. Like any sober individual would not put his
Yeah.
girlfriend in the trunk of a car. And a lot of us, we will go into a store or we'll go onto a website with really good intentions and unfortunately be convinced that we can't live without something, or
Yeah.
we are led to believe that we are making a good financial purchasing decision, when in reality the advice that we're getting isn't necessarily good advice for us. It's good advice for the person that's giving us the advice, right? We
Yeah.
have to be conscious of who is telling us how to spend our money, and we can't listen to the stores and the owners who are trying to sell products. Those are the individuals we cannot be listening to. So
Yeah.
my friend is the consumer in that transaction, and I am unfortunately the disingenuous vendor. Exactly. Like that would look great on you. It's 50% off, so maybe you could
Right?
take two, right?
Right? That was it.
Yeah. And so like, when you're talking about budgeting, it can't really be all about the negatives, right? The positive, we really need to like, in my personal opinion, when we're talking about managing our finances, I believe that like it's best to talk about the benefits of budgeting. So there's a fourth character in this story,
Mm,
and you guessed who it was the first time around. So I'm not going to ask you, but the real beauty, right? The individual who was like really playing the game the right way was the musician Dick Dale that we went to go see, right? This guy, like, you got to look him up. He is the most average individual you will have ever seen. Frumpy. When I was seeing him, he was like towards the end of his career, like super like average individual, but he took an instrument and turned himself into an amazing rock star, right?
yeah,
Lived this wild life. He owned an airport on his property. Um, he was just a really cool guy. And when it comes to budgeting and spending and your financial well-being, like, that's what a budget is, right? We're all using, it's not the same instrument that Dick Dale used, but we're using an instrument to like effectively change our place in life. Where we want to become rock stars. We want to like pursue that rock
yeah.
star life. We're obviously not going to be playing music on a stage. We're not going to have adoring fans. We're not going to have, sold out shows, but we can live like a rock star, right? We can spend our
Yeah.
days doing the things that are most important to us, whether it's, work life balance or maintaining our mental health or going on an epic vacation or buying a house. Like, there are things that rock stars do that that are available to all of us if we learn how to use the right instruments to get us there. And so, like, to me, that last week anyway, it seemed like the perfect story to talk about budgeting, right?
It's awesome. There's so many. I was thinking about the story more because it's also, the girlfriend that was unconscious to everything, and like the truest danger that you can have is when you're not doing anything with your finances. You're just like, let's let it be, and let it ride. And it's really dangerous. And like you said, like I just this last week when I went through all of these different computer deals. And like I was using ChatGPT like crazy because I was getting confused, man. I was like, all right, these are the specs here. This is the discount. And I was plugging everything in. And it did confirm what I thought like at the end of the day. But there were things that looked really good. Like, ooh, look at this one. That one looks like it's a great deal. But then when I actually compared like the specs and everything, it was a horrible deal. But it looked fancy and they had all of the pictures on there. It's like sale, summer special. And I was just like, ooh, a summer special. Like that sounds good. And it just
Summer's
had the
not
word
going to be, yeah, summer's not going to be coming around until next summer. I don't want
right.
to wait that long. Yeah, it's, dude, the whole world, right? It is like, and again, I'm not necessarily evil, right? In my story, I was telling my buddy to lock his girlfriend in
Yeah,
a trunk, and I wasn't doing it to be mean or malicious. I just had an agenda. I wanted to see the
that's it.
show. I didn't want to go home. And so, you know, like, dude, I was in Vegas this whole weekend, and I used to love gambling, and I'm just not really into it anymore. But like, that's the holy grail of
Yeah.
of individuals and entities that are really against your best interests, right? And and and
Right.
and dude, it's
That's a
just like
great way to put it.
yeah, they're experts at it, right? So like, I bet you haven't even given a single thought as to why you gamble with chips and not cash, right? So like,
Mm,
you go convert your cash to chips, and then you go to the tables or you go to the slot machines. And the whole reason that you do that is because you have a very strong emotional attachment to cash. And so
yep.
when you're looking at cash on the table and you slide a 20 into the middle of the pot, like, or 100,
Yeah, you're like,
there's a real emotional attachment to like the sight of cash. So casinos are like, hey, listen, you know what? Let's detach. Let's separate that emotional connection So gamblers will be more, or individuals will be more willing to put the 20 and the 100 in the middle of the pot. We don't have the same emotional connection to a chip that we do with a $100 bill. And that's just one example of the hundreds that take
Yeah.
place in those places. And so you're right. Like the vast majority of us, me include, like I spent the whole week. I have no idea how much money I spent in Vegas. I literally have not thought about it at all. But I have the luxury of doing that now because I've spent the last 30 years paying so much attention to how my money was working for me and what I spent my money on, what I said no to continuously and what I said yes to continuously. I've gotten to a point where, like, for me, my financial freedom is like the thing that provides the most benefit. Like I like having fun and doing what I like to do and not really worrying about what kind of money I'm spending. For me, that's like living like a rock star. But
I
I
love
didn't
that.
just get here blindly. Like I really had to work at it. And so I personally think that's what this episode, the beauty of this episode is just sort of setting the stage for budgeting.
Yeah, and we're gonna have multiple episodes on budgeting, but today we're kind of talking a little bit about the triangle, the money in, money out, and then kind of what's left. And one of the things that I was thinking about with budgeting that was really awesome is that this last week I got thinking more after the episode, and I started thinking about like, because when you're thinking about these three different sides, again, money in, money out, and then what's left, I started thinking about because I always, every time I think about, and we spent a lot of time on money in, but every time I think about budgeting, I tend to, and I kind of think a lot of people talk about this, they're always focused on money out, but, another huge part is, and I was sitting there talking to my wife, I was like, I need a job change because my money in right now is the problem. It's not my money out. I don't spend excessively. I'm quite frugal. But right
Yeah.
now, for me, my problem is the money inside. And that was this awareness because when you start looking at that, I can go, okay, well, how do I increase my income opportunities? How can I start pulling more in? And for people that are in college, we're going to talk about this. And you leaned in on this, like they're at a great time. But like the flip side is again, where are you spending? What do you like putting your money on? And then you have that leftover that you can do whatever you want with, whether it be saving for emergency or your long-term goals, but you're not going to have that if you're not paying attention to the other two.
Yeah. It, it, um, so watching some of your podcasts with other guests and then just being aware of all the literature that's out there about, you know, budgeting. A lot of people will say, "Hey, listen, budgeting, everybody hears that fucking word and it's just like, kryptonite and nobody really wants to think about or talk about budgeting. It sounds complicated and boring. And so let's change the terminology to conscious spending, right?
I love that.
And let's and I agree that's really powerful. Like, let's be very conscious about how you're spending money. But when you change the conversation from budgeting to conscious spending, you're almost wiping out one of the key elements of your financial well-being, which is the income, right? So like we can't
Yeah.
just be focused
Right.
on conscious spending. It has to be conscious spending and, you know, really paying attention to the money coming in and what kind of control you have on that aspect of your life and when is it most important to be thinking. I mean, it's always important to be thinking about money in, but for somebody who's in college or just getting started in their career, like thinking about the way that you make money is a really powerful thing for you to explore, right? And so, it's like a lot of individuals spend a lot of time thinking about, what they want to do for the rest of their life when they're in college. And that's a good pursuit. But I'm, you know, I'm just going to be brutally honest. The vast majority of us don't ever figure that out. It's almost an impossible exercise trying to figure out what you're going to do for the rest of your life when you grow up. And so, like, a more
Right.
interesting conversation would be like, how am I gonna survive, and how am I gonna make money, and what does my career look like? Maybe just for 5 years out of college. Like, let's not even worry about what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. How am I just going to survive and pay the bills? Right. And then after I establish a little bit of, solid groundwork on my financial well being, and once I've been exposed to careers in the real world outside of college, maybe then I could start figuring out what I'm going to do for the next 5 to 10 years. So anyway, I think I'm getting ahead of myself, but like the money coming in is a very important aspect of your financial well-being. It can't just be conscious spending.
Well, and I love it too, because again, we had been talking about, I wish some, if I could go back in time, I wouldn't change anything, the whole time travel paradox, but
Yeah.
I would tell, there is one thing I would love to do. And I ask this to people all the time. I wish that I could go back to young Sean, who was bouncing from major to major. And I wish I could show him, Sean, right now you might not think about this. You might sit there and go, yeah, man, I want to, do the travel the world, walk the earth like Kane from Kung Fu. That was my whole thing, man. I wanted to study Eastern philosophy. I wanted to be like a monk and, like practice Zen and the art of archery and stuff, which is pretty awesome. But I, now that I've got a wife and kid, you know, there's a little bit of a different focus there. And, and I couldn't even comprehend that. But I wish that I could go and talk to younger Sean and say, hey, you know what? That degree right there, it's not going to earn as much money as you think it is, Like, oh, no. Yeah, and the marketing at my school and the marketing at my graduate school was even more so, like, you know what? This degree is going to pay you a lot of money. It doesn't. It doesn't, and then like, like, hey, this major, there's a lot of options for people with history majors. No, there's not. There's not,
Yeah.
and I love it. I loved what I studied. And that's the thing. Like there is this fine line between passion but yet there's also this reality about, survival. It's interesting because here in Vietnam, all the parents push their kids towards medicine and law, and people go, why is that such a thing? Because the parents recognize that they struggled and they're like, I don't want my kids to struggle the same way. It's like, and so they push the kids towards something that makes money. And one of the things I saw this Instagram video, there was a bunch of kids from this specific video was a school in New York, and it was people talking about their majors. And this video was a little bit of someone was throwing some shade. It wasn't the nicest video, but it was like, I'm this major. And the person's like, barista, and it's like, I'm this major. And I'm not hating on baristas, but like the whole point of the video was trying to tell people in a very comical way that there are certain things, degrees, and it's like, and yeah, if college was free and everyone was guaranteed a universal basic income,
Yeah.
certainly. Go
Yeah.
study. Dude, if that was the reality, I would love to learn, like, I would love I'd go back to school and learn samurai sword making. No joke.
Yeah.
It would be
Yeah.
awesome. I would sit there in my
Yeah.
blacksmith shop every day making samurai swords. But there's not those things. And, and I've got a wife and kids to pay for, so there's the reality to check in. And when you're my age, our age, we're about the same. It's harder to make those changes, So you studied samurai sword making. Wow, that's rad. But now you're sitting there going, wow, the market for samurai swords is not what I was told in school. They told me that everyone needed a samurai sword, which they do. They do. But the reality is most people don't have one, you know?
That's and again, I think like your comment about not throwing shade at baristas is a really important thing to emphasize, which
100%.
is which is like when you are young and you are thinking about the rest of your life, right? You should be conscious of, again, if you do want to go be a barista or make samurai swords, you should have an appreciation for what the financial aspect of that is really going to look like in
Yep.
order for you to make the right decision, right? So again,
Yep.
you could say, okay, listen, I want to go make samurai swords, and I realize that it's going to be really difficult to make ends meet, and as I progress in life, it'll be difficult to, be a contributing member of a family, and so like you should just be thinking and be conscious of what your decisions currently lead to down the future, because like I promise you, when you're our age, it's really hard, like you were saying, to switch lanes. Like, I
Yep.
have a bunch of guys that I grew up with, and a lot of them chose to go into like the restaurant business, and they were servers. And when we were in our 20s, they were loving life. They had lots of disposable income, and they were having a lot of fun. And um they're still kind of living that lifestyle. And I'm 56 now. And I guarantee you the last thing I would ever want to do is have to put up with some asshole at a restaurant telling me that
Yep.
he's not happy or she's not happy with their food. Like, to be on the other side of that at 56, I think I would kill myself. And so like, amongst my friend group, I was the individual who was constantly, I was working in construction, and I was like, man, I am just not going to be able to do this when I'm 55. Right. So I
Yeah.
was making a good amount of money as a high school dropout in the construction business, but I was like, had the foresight to say, like, at some point, like this gravy train's going to run out. And like, what am I going to do? And that was really the impetus behind me, like, diving back into college, was that I was concerned with what my life was going to look like at 55, 60, in the construction business. And so I think when we talk about budgeting and money coming in, man, there's just there's so much power and freedom that can come from just thinking about that as a young individual. And again, like, we'll get into it in other episodes, but there's no reason why you can't pursue a history degree, right? And still
And
be
make money.
very successful
Yes.
as in the real world. Like, those two things can go hand in hand if you do the education part the right way. Right. So again, like, a lot of jobs in the world are really looking for problem solvers for the most part. And so if
Yes.
you can present yourself as a problem solver, even as a history major, you're in great shape. It's just the case usually is that a lot of the business majors, they tend to be told, like, that they're being taught by individuals who are very connected to the business world, and so they are hearing that they're the business majors. They're not learning a skill. What they're learning isn't much different than a history major's learning, but they're at least being told, hey, listen, these are the things that are really important if you want to be successful in the business world. You have to get an internship while you're going to college, and you have to demonstrate the fact that you've had like real world experiences. And again, I don't want to get too far into some other topic, but there are ways to do things the right way. And just being conscious of the factors that you need to be thinking about is super important.
This is exactly what I told my daughter. She's like, "Daddy, what job should I have?" And I said, "Ilani, you can have any job you want within reason." And she's like, "Anything?" I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, what should I do then?" And I was like, "Well, whatever it is, you get to pick it, but we're going to teach you how to make money with it." And she's like, "Yeah." I said, "You want to be an artist? That's great. You're not going to be a starving artist. We're going to learn the skills that you can learn how to promote your art and be a successful artist. You want to be a historian? All right, cool. That's awesome. How can you make money at being a historian?" And I think that was the challenge for me, is that I was taught these things and I did a major, but I wasn't thinking about the money coming in. And no one was talking about, all right, well, how do we make money with this? Because, like, you're right. There's this guy that has this awesome history podcast. that is so cool. He's making great money. It's sponsored, and and it's like it's a really interesting thing, or these other things. It's not about the degree. It's about, can you make money at it? And for the barista thing, there was a guy, not a barista, but there was a mechanic, no, not a maintenance worker at this school, who his entire career only earned his basic wage. He worked at this one school, I believe, for 40 years. I can't remember his name. But when he retired, he died. And then they found out the guy had $8 million in, through different investments. And like, he didn't get anything else. Every single penny that he earned all those years, he invested, and he never pulled it out. And he just kept investing it and kept letting it to ride. And he was a janitor in a school.
Yeah. I tell my students all the time, um, my dad was Irish and my father-in-law was Mexican. One went to college, the other one didn't.
Mm.
One bought his kids 4 houses. The other one didn't. Right? Everybody automatically is like, oh,
They think it's the
the
college student
college
who bought the.
educated white guy was the
Yep.
one that did really well, bought houses for his kids. Well, it turns out it was my father-in-law who had I don't even think he went to high school, and he worked as a mechanic for the police department, and he played music on the weekend. He was in a mariachi band on the weekends, but he saved his money, he invested it, and he purchased property with it. And he
Yep.
bought enough, he got one property and leveraged that into another property. He bought like 3 of his kids their first homes. Like my wife and I, we bought a condo from him. And that was
It's
my
awesome.
entry into the real estate market. And that would have never happened for me had he not done that for us. And it was because he was just conscious about the way that he, spent his money and how he invested it. And
I love
and
that.
it's just a really powerful thing. And so, you know,
It's
I
testament to this, man.
yeah, I think a lot of us like, we get a degree in history and then we think we're going to be making, but we're going to be living this lavish lifestyle when we graduate from college. And I promise you, it doesn't matter what degree and, maybe nursing and a few other professions out of undergrad will allow you the opportunity to make a lot of money. But for the most part, like a lot of us, when we leave college, the lifestyle that we anticipate is much different than the reality, right? So
100%.
like it just takes so much money to support yourself in the real world. And you're doing yourself such a disservice by not thinking about that in college, right? So like I
Yeah.
just randomly I used ChatGPT and I was just like out of curiosity, how much would what would my monthly budget be? Like how much money would I spend if I was single, living in San Francisco and maybe had a couple of roommates? And it was like the range was somewhere between 2,000 and 3,500 a month.
Yeah.
And if you think about what that means in terms of an annual salary, like so a lot of us would be like, okay, $2,000 a month, that means I'd probably have to be making 24,000 a year, right?
Yeah.
That's that math isn't the right math, right? So 2,000 a month is after you've already had all these taxes taken out of your paycheck. So you have to gross up your your income. So 2,000 in expenses is really more like 3,000 in income. And then
Yeah.
if you think about what does $2,000 a month really even look like? Dude, that is such a bare minimum lifestyle. Like the 2,000 was living in not like a terrible neighborhood in a terrible house with 2
Yep.
roommates and
Yep.
not having a car payment, not having student loan debt, not having any credit card debt. So it's like hugely unrealistic. In my opinion, in the Bay Area, for somebody single living a decent lifestyle, probably more like 3,500 a month. And
Yeah.
3,500 a month is equivalent to about a $65,000 annual salary. And
Yeah.
again, the 3,000 a month or 3,500 a month, that still doesn't include your car payment, your student loans, any credit card debt that you got into. So like the bare minimum to really live like a decent lifestyle when you graduate is probably going to be somewhere around 65,000 a year. And then from there, you can then in college start thinking about, okay, like what kind of jobs am I really going to want to go look for? And what am I realistically going to be making when I graduate? And if I do want to go into history, if I really love history, what are what are the sacrifices I'm willing to make when I graduate? And then in turn, what are the things that I could be doing in college that are going to put me on a path where I'm making the most that I can possibly make within that profession? And so
Yeah.
like I think that's really, next episode is really getting into the nuts and bolts of the different types of budgets that are out there. But in this episode, I think what we're trying to articulate is that like the more conscious we are of this aspect of our life, the more power that we have as we move through life.
I love that. And I think it really is about being conscious and about paying attention to that, again, that triangle, the money in, money out, and what's left over. Because like, so I'm trying to look at my triangle. And so I've got a couple different options on the table. And one of them was to stay here in Southeast Asia. And the other was to come back to the States and get some work up in the Napa Valley where my family lives. And I was looking, I was like, well, Napa Valley, I make a lot more money. And then I was like crunching the numbers though. And I was like, dude, the most basic rental in that area is going to be insanely expensive. And then, I'm going to have to get a new car. And so I'm going to be commuting. I'm going to have fuel costs because to live in something that's anywhere near affordable, it's going to be pretty far. It's going to be an hour commute each way. And so I was just crunching the numbers there. And then so suddenly that big paycheck started shrinking really fast, like
Yeah.
really, really fast. It started shrinking down. Yeah, and that's where these different sides affect it versus, here I don't have any rent that I have to pay. I have no overhead for housing. But the challenge that is in Vietnam is like the money coming in is not as big. The salaries are not as big. And so it always is this puzzle. Like you're working this puzzle, but you have to be aware of the puzzle because at the end of the day, it might be better to go back there, but it might be better to work here and then try to tap clients from there. It's like, how can you play this puzzle? But again, whether you realize it or not, and I think this is the thing that we've been hammering at here for a while with this, especially around the history degree, whether you realize it or not, you're playing the game. You're in the game. And what
Yeah.
budgeting is all about is becoming aware of you're in the game. It's like, let's imagine that like you're a kid and you're like, I don't like sports. I'm the emo kid, like, what do you want to do? I'm gonna flick my
Yeah.
hair all day, and you're not wearing all black, it's like, and so they put you on the basketball court and you're just like, like, I don't like this game, so you're not playing the game and you start just getting destroyed for points, because you're like,
Yeah.
it's not my game. But the reality is whether you realize it or not, you're standing on the court. You're on
Yeah.
the court.
Yeah.
Being alive means that you're on the court. So you can sit there and flip your hair back and say, I don't like this game all you want, but you're still on the court, man. And I think that there's just this awareness that what budgeting is like, I love the movie Moneyball. And, one of my favorite movies of all time. I love
Yeah.
Brad Pitt in that movie, Jonah Hill.
Yeah.
And they were
Yeah.
looking at the little things. And like everyone thought, and this comes back to budgeting too, everyone thought you need the player that's going to hit all the home runs. And what they realized was, no, you don't. You need the guy who gets on base. You get on base. the runs come in. And so it literally, they were playing this game of numbers, and it was literally just a numbers game. Like, you get on base enough, then you're going to naturally score, and you just have to have people who get on base. And they started beating all of these teams who had everything figured out. All of these teams that were these big money teams spending tons of money got destroyed by the A's that season because they had a simple philosophy. Now, when the big teams learned about this technique, then once again, the system kind of came back and kicked the A's butts. But like, again, when you're able to kind of look at these things, you don't have to think about so many things. When you're thinking about budgeting, what's coming in, what's going out, and what do I have left? I mean, that's
Yeah.
really the secret. And
Yeah.
learning to, what's coming in is based on your choices. And what we've been hammering is the choices early on in life. And what's going out is based on your choices and your self-control, so there's a lot there. But, then the sweet spot is really the gap, what's left over, and that gap can be used for so many things. But like, if you don't have a gap or you're going into a deficit, like, let's talk about the opposite. Like, you don't have enough money coming in and you're spending too much, and you start going to a negative and you start racking up credit card debt. That's going to be really painful. And that's something that sticks with people for a long time.
Yeah, for it, yeah, it locks them into a a lifestyle of well, it makes it really difficult to do the things that you want to do in life when you're paying for the mistakes of the past. And credit card debt, student loan debt are two real common anchors for a lot of people in real life. Like, it takes years to climb out of that. And so again, like, but budgeting, everybody hears that term and it's like, oh man, that sounds like terrible. It's just like, you know, let's be real. You're never going to go to the gym for the rest of your life. You're definitely never going to be budgeting for the rest of your life. And budgeting doesn't have to be something that we obsess about on a daily basis, especially when you're young, right? So when you're
Yeah.
young, there are, nobody has to tell you how to live an inexpensive lifestyle. You are the
You're already
expert.
doing it.
You're the expert at learning how to like manage off of very little. Okay.
Right.
So like, you don't really need to be so focused on the expenses and learning how to control your expenses. What you really need to be focused on is when you move up the earning scale, right? So
Yeah.
when you graduate and you start making money, and then like, for me, I think when I graduated, I was making like 35,000 a year. And then I switched companies and I went from 35,000 a year to 60,000.
Wow.
And yeah, and so one of the one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me was that I started budgeting when I was only making 35,000 a year, right?
There
So
you go.
I got, I was heavily into snowboarding, and I was heavily into going out and having fun. And I wanted to do both, but I couldn't afford it. And so I started like really tracking my expenses so that I can figure out a way where I can go snowboarding and still go have my fun on the weekends, and not give up either one of those, because those were the two priorities to me. So I was really focused on my money at that time. And then I switched jobs. Like, I was working in the tax department for Arthur Andersen, and I wasn't really happy with that. I wanted to go work in the hotel industry for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I moved to LA. I was living in LA when my buddy from San Francisco came, and we locked
Yeah.
his girlfriend in the trunk. But my income jumped. My income jumped from 35,000 to 60,000. And I was really focused on the way that I was spending money. And so, like, again, the luckiest thing that ever happened to me was that when my income went up, I was very conscious about, what am I going to do with that incremental money? Right. So a
Yeah.
lot of us, when we move from one income level to another, a lot of people will just start spending a lot more. Right. So
That
like,
creep, man.
It's like, wow, like now I can afford to go out to dinner, and now I can afford to maybe go get a nicer looking phone or a better car. We all sort of like inflate our expenses.
Yeah.
And so when you're young, like you don't have to be obsessed about budgeting the way I was. What you want to be focused on is just like how you're moving through certain phases of your life, right? So when you move income, where does that incremental income go? Like, how does that fit with what you really want out of life? Like, what is it that you really want? What are your priorities? And so when you move into that new income, let's just make sure that that income gets directed to the right priorities rather than just mindlessly spending on things that seem interesting or fun in the moment.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's it. That's something that you had said last time, that like conscious spending and and budgeting and all this is about aligning your spending with, again, what really matters to you. It's not about math. It's not all about math. It's about purpose. It's about living with a purpose. It's about thinking about what your goals are and why they're important. For me, for a lot of parents, thinking about, all right, well, I want my daughter to be able to go to a good school. I want to be able to make sure that we have the ability to visit grandma once a year. We're not going to be able to do that if I'm eating, certain foods every day, or, going to this place and buying this type of stuff all the time. It's like I've got my guilty pleasure. One of the things I love is sourdough loaves. And the problem is, in Vietnam, they're damn expensive. It's like $10 a loaf, where food's really cheap. And that's not that much money. $10 a loaf. Well, if you eat, one loaf a day, that's $300 a month right there, And you're like, well, it's not that much. And it was like the Vegas thing you talked about in the beginning. One of the things that when I moved to Southeast Asia, right in the beginning, and when I was looking at money that wasn't my money, I had no emotional attachment to it. So I was like, 500,000 down. That's not that much. Toss it around. And 500,000 was $25. And it was really easy to spend 500,000 down, but it's, $25. I sit there and look at that, go, hey, maybe I should be more careful with that. That's my time, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's like, you got to make sure that it's anchored. But again, if you think about what's important to you, then it's easier to make these decisions that affect larger, longer term things.
Yeah. The listen, I think we need to get into, wants versus needs and what are the categories of spending, all that stuff. But um oh man, you know what? I think I just lost my train of thought, but I had
I'm
something.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I had something that I really wanted to say in response to what you were just articulating, but I'm not even going to try to figure that out. So,
That's awesome. Well,
just
you glorious. Well, I think that, like, what I think is that we do have next episode. One of the things that we're diving into is actually diving into, like, yeah, different expenses. And looking at the different categories. What are we going to be talking about? What are some of your sources of income? What is going out? What are the things that you're spending money on? And, again, like talking wants and needs. And then at the end of it, talking about, well, what is left over and what should you be doing with that? And I think, but we also are going to look into different types of budgets and things like that.
one of the, you, you know, I think one of the things that I learned in college, I get asked all the time. So backing up, I resonate with hoodlums, right? So they hit hoodlums that come into my class. We always tend to hit it off, and a lot of
That's
those
awesome.
kids will ask me like, "Well, how did you how did you find the discipline in doing the homework?" Because like I struggle with doing the homework and having the discipline. And I tell those kids all the time, like, listen, the two things that really, really helped me was first, I had a clear understanding of what my objective was. I
Yeah.
knew what I wanted. I wanted to go to Cal and I wanted to graduate from college. And then the second thing was that I knew every little thing I had to do in order to get there. I had this education plan. And so I didn't do anything spectacular other than identify the prize and then string all the steps and see those steps from where I was to where I wanted to be. And so like the discipline part was easy because I understood like, hey, listen, if I sit down and do the homework on a Friday night and get through this assignment, like this is one step closer to what I really want, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm never gonna be sitting around on a Friday and be like, hey, I should just do some fucking homework right now. Like that's never that's gonna be the last thing that I would ever want to do. But if I understand that action leads me to what I really want, then I'm going to find the motivation to sit down and do the homework. And to me, right, a budget is like the roadmap to your dreams, right? So again,
Yeah.
we all really kind of worry about in college, we're always, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? What's my career going to look like? Right? Those are interesting conversations to have with yourself. But again, like I said, I personally never figured that out. But what I did figure out was that like there were clear things that I wanted in life. So early on, I wanted to go snowboarding. Then it turned into, boy, it'd really be nice if my wife stayed home from work when the kids were born. And then it went to, wow, it would be really nice to live in Europe when we retired. And then it was, hey, you know what? It would be really nice to send my kids to a really good college. And those were like not unrealistic goals for somebody average. I wasn't making tons and tons of money in my career, but I identified what my objective was. And then I sat down and I made sure that my spending and my income, right, were such that the difference between my income and my spending provided enough wiggle room that I can then allocate money to my priorities. And that's all we're saying budgeting is it's not this evil thing that's going to cause tons of anxiety. Instead, what it is it's an instrument that we can use to achieve like really big things in life.
I love that. That's it. And it's like a scales, it's a series of scales. Like what's more important, this right now or that in the future or that
Yeah.
now, it's like, it's a
Yeah.
balance, it's like, it's
Yeah.
simply that. It's like looking at your priorities and figuring it out. And it's a tool that can help you get there. And I think that, if, and what I'm looking forward to in our conversation about types of budgets is I think that people get overwhelmed because they think the budget is just this meticulous thing where you're hammering away on everything, but it's actually an awareness. There's different types of budgets. You don't have to do everything the same. And there's different ways to do it. And that's what I'm excited to dive into because, certain types of budgets I have always failed. But, this last week after this discussion, I was sitting there going, all right, this is my budget triangle. This is what's coming in. This is what's going out. And this is what's left over. And I really need to focus more on what's coming in. And just simply that shift was enough to help me realize, wow, I've been sitting here looking at this side, beating myself up every time I bought anything, but really I just need to fix this side. And, it's that awareness that you are able to bring to your spending and to your earning is a huge gift that you can give yourself.
I mean, that's really what it is it's being aware of and visually seeing,
Yeah.
how you get from one step to another. For me, I've got so many things that run around in my head that it's really hard to it's really hard to make sense of my own thoughts. And I find that when I put them down on paper, it really anchors things. And it really
Yeah.
allows me to identify like, okay, what areas do I have control over and what areas do I need to improve on? Right. So again, like I have a mortgage. And so there's no fucking way that I'm ever going to be able to figure out how to pay less of a mortgage.
Right.
Right. But I have like this insane food expenditure. Like the amount of money that we spend on food is fucking ridiculous. And, and so like if I just sit down and look at how much I'm spending on food, I can then just, again, I'm not going to obsess over it, but I'm at least going to be conscious of, okay, like, boy, we've really gone out to dinner quite a bit this last month. Maybe we should scale that back just a little bit. And I'm not
Yeah.
scaling back the expenditure to deprive myself of like eating good food. What I'm doing is scaling back a little bit so that I can reallocate that money to something that might be more important to me, like going to Vegas and not really worrying about the money that I'm spending in Vegas. I just want to go have fun. And so, because that's the priority, not eating out every night of the week, I'm just going to be more conscious of it. And so let's just identify areas within, the money coming in or the money coming out where we have control, we can make changes. And then from those changes and control, we can allocate the troops to the right fights that we want to partake in.
I love that you talked. I want to just tap on one last thing that you said there because it was so great. And it is that dichotomy of control. What can I control and what can I not? Because if you sit there and you start spinning your wheels on the things that are outside of your control, it's going to make you crazy. But instead, you're again focusing on the things that you do have control of to focus on your goals, like you said. And that's powerful, man, because if we put our will to something, we can accomplish anything, within
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's just like, for me, again, it was the snowboarding, the one of the parents staying home during the kids' young lives and then retirement. But like everybody has their own agenda, right? So a
Yeah.
lot of students that come through my class say that like work life balance is super important. And if work life balance is important, then I think what I'm hearing is like, I'm not going to want to like be killing myself at work, which means maybe my income isn't going to be as high as somebody else's. And therefore, I really need to be conscious of how I spend my money. And the more
Yeah.
conscious I am about the way that I spend my money, the more flexibility I have in the types of jobs that I pursue that will allow me to maintain a work life balance. Or it could be I want to retire, when I'm 50, or it could be, I want to maintain my mental health, there's all sorts of different objectives and everybody's got their own set of priorities. And so I think all we're saying is list out your priorities, figure out what you want in life beyond just like the basic stuff that you can do day to day. And then like focus on your income and your expenses, identify the things that you can control, and then actively go about consciously making an effort to control what it is you can control so that you can use the difference between your income and your expenses to like fund the things that are super important
Yep.
to you.